It was a heavy August morning in Blue Ridge, North Carolina. The air clung to the skin, thick with heat and silence, broken only by the sound of tires on cracked pavement. A man stepped out of an old sedan and walked toward the police precinct. His clothes were plain, a plaid shirt, worn jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. Nothing about him suggested authority. He looked like any other passerby. No one glanced twice. Inside the building, the fluorescent lights hummed. Officers laughed in corners, sipping coffee, trading stories, hardly paying attention. Until one voice cut through. "Hey, you. Lost, are we?" A tall officer with a smug grin stepped forward. His badge caught the light. The man paused, his jaw tight but calm. Before he could answer, the officer closed the distance, his eyes narrowing for the crowd watching. Then it happened. The officer spat in his face. The room erupted with laughter. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The man stood still, wiping his cheek with slow, deliberate care. Around him, the laughter grew louder, but inside he carried a truth no one else knew. This man wasn't a nobody. He was the newly appointed chief of police. And in a few minutes, every smirk in that room would vanish. Days earlier, his appointment had been quietly confirmed. He had chosen not to announce his arrival. He wanted to see the department as it really was, without rehearsed greetings, without masks. He had heard the whispers of misconduct, the stories of prejudice. Now he had lived it. And he would use this moment to show them what leadership meant. When the intercom called everyone to the briefing room, the man walked silently to the back. Officers streamed in, still joking, still unaware. The captain cleared his throat. "Today we welcome our new chief." All eyes turned as the man stepped forward, now carrying a folder with the precinct's seal. The room fell into stunned silence. Faces went pale. The same man they mocked, the same man they spit on, now stood at the front as their leader. He began to speak. His voice was steady, his tone sharp but calm. He told them why he came in plain clothes. He told them what he had seen. He didn't raise his voice, but each word landed heavy. "Respect is not optional," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. His eyes fell on the officer who spat on him. The man shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming at his brow. The chief continued, "When you disrespected me, you didn't just insult one man. You insulted the badge, the oath, and this community." Then came the decision that silenced the room even further. Effective immediately, the officer was suspended. It wasn't just punishment, it was a warning. A culture built on arrogance and cruelty was ending that day. The weeks ahead tested everyone. Some officers resisted, others stayed quiet, unsure. But slowly the shift began. The new chief walked the halls every day, greeting people by name, making his presence felt. A young recruit admitted she had stayed silent out of fear, but wanted to do better. He told her, "That's all I ask. It starts with you." The suspended officer tried to appeal, but records surfaced, complaints ignored, misconduct buried. His power crumbled. For the first time, accountability was real. The precinct, once loud with cruel laughter, grew quieter, more cautious. The change was slow, uneven, but it had begun. Months passed. The precinct was no longer the same place. Officers who clung to the old ways were gone, replaced by recruits who carried themselves differently. Morning chatter in the hallways had changed. It wasn't sharp laughter at someone's expense, it was genuine, light, and free of malice. For the first time in years, the building felt alive in a different way. The community outside noticed too. Small things at first. Officers walking the beat with open eyes instead of closed hearts. Neighbors beginning to wave again. Calls handled with patience instead of contempt. It wasn't perfect, but trust, once broken, was beginning to stitch itself back together. At a community event one Saturday, the chief found himself face to face with a young boy. The boy looked up shyly and asked, "Are you really the chief?" His small voice carried more weight than any council meeting. The chief crouched down so they were eye level. "I am," he said, smiling softly. "My dad says the police don't care about us," the boy whispered. The word stung heavy with truth. The chief didn't deny it. Instead, he nodded gently. "I can't change the past," he said. "But I can promise you this, we're working every day to be better. And if you ever need help, you come find me." The boy smiled just a little, and that small smile was enough to remind him why he had taken this job. Back at the precinct, the chief continued his work. He pushed for training, for conversations that were long overdue. Bias, respect, accountability. The words weren't popular, but they were necessary. Not everyone welcomed the change, some left. But those who stayed began to carry themselves differently. Younger recruits stepped forward, inspired by a leader who didn't just preach integrity but lived it. As his first year came to an end, the chief stood in the main hallway watching officers finish their shifts. The sounds of the precinct were familiar. Doors closing, radios crackling, boots echoing, but the energy was not the same. He saw camaraderie, not cruelty. He saw respect, not arrogance. It had not been easy. It never would be. But he had planted something new, something worth fighting for. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time it felt possible. Change was no longer a distant hope. It was alive in that building, in the officers, in the community. And all of it began on that humid August morning, when a man walked into a precinct in plain clothes, spat on and mocked only to reveal the truth. He was the chief in charge. And he had come not to be feared, but to lead. The heat sat low over Blue Ridge that morning. Clouds pressed down on the hills. The air felt like a wet blanket. He parked 2 blocks from the precinct on purpose. No ceremony. No assigned spot. He wanted to walk like any stranger would. He checked the mirror. Plaid shirt, worn jeans, old cap, no badge on his belt, no polished shoes. He took a steady breath and stepped out. On the sidewalk, a woman pushed a stroller past a cracked curb. A delivery truck idled near the corner store. Somewhere a dog barked, sharp and tired. The city looked the way it always did at 8 a.m. ordinary. That was the point. He needed to see what people did when they thought no one important was watching. He crossed into the precinct lot. Patrol cars came and went. Doors slammed. Radios hissed. 2 officers joked near the trunk of a cruiser, laughing at a story only they found funny. Another officer scrolled his phone while a man at the front steps asked for directions. The officer pointed without looking up. He kept moving. No one recognized him. Good. Inside the side entrance, the air changed. Cold fluorescent light, clean floors that still smelled like last night's bleach, a bulletin board covered in flyers, CPR class, softball league, an old missing poster curling at the edges. A complaint box sat on a table. The slot was dusty. That told him enough. He walked past records. A woman waited at the window, holding a folder tight to her chest. "Ma'am, you'll have to fill the form online," the clerk said without meeting her eyes. The woman started to ask another question. The clerk had already turned to his screen. He noted it. He didn't pull a pad from his pocket. He kept it all in his head. He had learned long ago that people act different the second a pen appears. He drifted down the hall. Voices spilled from the squad room. Laughter rose, then dropped into a hush, then rose again. The kind of laughter that warned him more than any shout would. He paused at the doorway and glanced in. A circle of officers, a private joke, one of them nudging another in the ribs. A younger officer stood on the edge of the circle, arms crossed, eyes tight. She didn't laugh. She also didn't speak. Fear has a posture. He recognized it. He moved on. At the training board, the schedule was out of date. A poster on de-escalation hung crooked. A corner had ripped away, taped back with a strip of clear tape that had turned yellow. He straightened it with 2 fingers, then let it be. He wasn't here to fix paper. He was here to fix people. A janitor wheeled a cart from the restroom and nodded. "Morning. Morning," he said back and meant it. Small things matter. He slowed his steps near the locker room as 2 officers walked out. One of them used a tone he had heard too often in too many cities. That slow, sharp tone people use when they want to make another person small. He didn't look up. He caught badge numbers without thinking about it. He followed the smell of stale coffee to the break room. A metal pot sat on a warmer. Someone had left crumbs on the counter. Someone else had left a paper cup near the edge. A brown ring drying into the surface. A TV in the corner ran the morning news with the volume low. The headline crawl mentioned the chief's appointment. No one in the room seemed to notice. He stood at the doorway long enough to be seen, not long enough to be remembered. In a room like this, rank is a language. Clothes are a language. He was speaking nobody. The room heard him. He made his way to the front desk. "Visitor pass?" he asked the sergeant there. The sergeant didn't look up. "Forms online," he said, the words automatic. "Come back after 10. He glanced at the wall clock. It wasn't yet 9. He thanked the sergeant anyway. He wasn't here to win a point. He was here to take the measure of the house. A radio squawked. The outer doors opened. Two patrol officers guided a teenage boy inside, hands behind his back. The boy's shoulders shook, not from anger but from pure fear. One officer spoke too loudly, the way people do when they want an audience. The other officer kept his eyes forward and said nothing. The boy's lip trembled. The loud officer smirked. The quiet one loosened his grip once they were past the doors. He filed both faces in his memory. Every door has two hinges. Every team has two kinds of people. He walked on. The hallway to the captain's office stretched ahead, clean and bright. He paused at a display case with old photos and patches. Black and white pictures watched him. Parades, retirements, a ceremony in winter coats. There was pride here. There had been pride, at least. He let his hand rest against the cool glass for a second. You don't rebuild pride with speeches. You rebuild it with choices. He turned toward the side corridor again. The laughter from the squad room got louder now, sharper, like someone had added a blade to it. He knew the sound. It always came right before someone pushed a joke too far. He stepped toward the break room again, just as a group shifted at the doorway. That's when the tall officer noticed him. The grin, the look, the kind of smile that isn't a smile at all. Hey you, the man called out, voice carrying over the hum. The room turned its head like a flock of birds. He stopped. He kept his breathing even. He had worn plain clothes for a reason. Now he would learn if the reason was still valid. Lost, are we? The officer said, drawing closer. This isn't a shelter. The words came smooth, practiced. It wasn't the first time he'd said them to someone. He didn't answer. He didn't move. Silence can be a mirror. Let a man see his own face in it. A few officers leaned back to watch. Someone chuckled. Someone else folded his arms. The younger officer with tight eyes stood just inside the squad room and stared at the floor. He thought of the phone on his desk that would ring later. He thought of the mothers who had stopped trusting these halls. He thought of the badge tucked away in his pocket, the weight of it, the oath it represented. He thought of the door he was about to open that had nothing to do with hinges. Didn't you hear me? The officer said louder now. Get out of here. He kept his voice level. I'm here for the briefing. That answer didn't fit the story the man wanted to tell. The officer stepped closer. Heat rolled off the room. The cheap coffee smell seemed stronger now. The TV in the corner ran a weather alert that no one noticed. The moment stretched thin. He held it. He let it stretch. He let every person in that doorway decide who they were going to be in the next 10 seconds. Then he shifted his weight just a little and looked the officer in the eye. Not angry, not afraid, present. Across the hall, the intercom crackled to life. A voice called all personnel to the briefing room. The sound cut through the tension like a door opening in a storm. He nodded once, almost polite, and turned toward the hall. Behind him, the laughter started up again, too loud, too sure. Ahead of him, the briefing room waited, bright and still. In a few minutes, the same people who had sized him up as a nobody would see him clearly. Not a stranger. Not a prop for a morning joke. The leader of their house. The line in the sand. The start of a new day. The hallway smelled faintly of burned coffee and floor wax. The chief kept walking, his head slightly bowed, his steps measured. He had wanted to see the raw truth, and now the truth was coming at him full force. Officer Daniels moved into his path like a wall. Broad shoulders, squared stance, a grin that was more sneer than smile. Behind him, two other officers leaned against the wall. Arms crossed, their eyes locked on the scene. They weren't just watching. They were waiting for entertainment, didn't you hear me? Daniels barked, his voice rising, laced with arrogance. This isn't a shelter. We don't need people like you hanging around here. The chief stood still, his gaze steady but unreadable. He had faced worse in the streets, worse in boardrooms, worse in neighborhoods where trust had long been broken. Yet this moment still cut deeper than he expected, not because of the spit or the words, but because it happened here, inside the very wall sworn to uphold dignity and law. Laughter erupted behind Daniels, sharp and ugly. One officer slapped the doorframe, roaring at the insult. Another muttered, "Put him in his place." The room around them felt smaller now, closing in, every chuckle another weight pressing down. Daniels took a step closer. The chief could smell the coffee on his breath, could see the glint of pleasure in his eyes as the officer leaned in. "You don't belong here," Daniels said slowly, clearly for the crowd to hear. Then without warning he spat. Warm, vile, heavy, straight into the chief's face. The world seemed to stop. The sound of the spit landing was louder than the laughter that followed. For one long heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room erupted again. More laughter. More smirks. To them, it was just another joke, another way to humiliate a man they thought powerless. The chief didn't flinch. He stood with the weight of the moment pressing on his chest, his jaw locked, his pulse racing. He reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out a plain white handkerchief. His movements were steady, deliberate, almost ceremonial. He wiped his cheek clean without a single word of anger. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, firm, carried not just by authority, but by something heavier. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" Daniel smirked, shrugging, trying to mask the first flicker of unease. "Only the ones who don't belong." His words dripped with confidence, but the room's laughter had softened into nervous chuckles. Some shifted uncomfortably. The young officer from earlier, the one with eyes too tight for laughter, now stared at the floor, shame pooling across her face. The chief said nothing more. He folded the handkerchief, tucked it back into his pocket, and turned down the hall. His stride was calm, measured, but every step was heavy with choice. He could have exploded. He could have shouted his title then and there, torn the mask away. Instead, he let the humiliation breathe, let it echo in their minds. Behind him, Daniels called out something half-hearted, a laugh forced to sound victorious. But deep down, a thread of doubt had already begun to weave. As the chief approached the end of the hall, the intercom crackled. "All personnel to the briefing room." All personnel. The timing was perfect. The stage was set. The chief tightened the brim of his cap. In just a few minutes, the same mouths that spat at him would be dry with silence. The same eyes that mocked him would widen in disbelief. And the same officer who thought himself untouchable would discover the truth. He hadn't spat on a stranger. He had spat on his new chief. The moment was coming, and the reckoning with it. The intercom crackled twice, then a clear voice filled the halls. "All personnel to the briefing room." Doors opened. Chairs scraped. A low river of voices moved in one direction. He followed at an easy pace, cap low, folder tucked under his arm. The corridor felt cooler than the rest of the building. Fluorescent light hummed. On the way in, he passed the display case of old photos again. He felt those eyes on his back, the weight of the past asking what he would do with the future. The briefing room was wider than it looked from the door. Rows of metal chairs faced a scarred lectern. A map of the city hung behind it with pins and string from old cases. A coffee urn steamed on a side table. The air smelled like paper and tired mornings. Officers filed in, filling the seats in loose clusters. Some joked. Some scrolled their phones. A few kept their eyes on the doorway like they were waiting for a show. The loud laughter from the squad room had followed them here. Thinner now, but still present. Officer Daniel stood near the side wall with his arms folded, chin high, a smirk stuck to his face like a badge he had chosen for himself. The captain stepped up to the lectern and tapped the mic. The room quieted by habit. "Settle down," he said. His voice carried the scratch of a man who had called order for many years. "We have an important introduction this morning." He waited a beat, eyes moving across the room, measuring who was ready and who was pretending. Then he nodded toward the side door. The man in the plaid shirt stepped through and paused. He took off his cap. He set the folder on the lectern and straightened it with one careful touch. He did not hurry. He allowed the room to see him. Not the clothes, not the sneakers. Him. The silence that fell was different from the captain's silence. This one had edges. A chair leg squeaked and then held still. Someone swallowed. Someone else set a cup down too fast and winced at the clink. In the third row, the young officer who had not laughed earlier stared down at her hands. Daniel's smirk faltered by the inch. His eyes narrowed like he was solving a problem that should have been easy. He shifted his weight. The two officers who had leaned on the wall with him straightened without meaning to. The man at the lectern lifted his chin. His voice was steady and warm like a door opening. "Good morning. My name is Richard Nelson. As of today, I am your chief of police." The words landed like a stamp. The room absorbed them in uneven waves. Surprise first. Then a fast scan of memory. Then the flush of recognition. Faces drained. A few heads dropped. One officer shut his eyes for a second and opened them again as if hoping the scene had changed. Daniels went red from the collar up. He pushed his tongue against his teeth like the right words might appear if he just pressed hard enough. They did not. He kept his arms folded to hide the shake in his hands. The chief let the silence do some of the work. He looked from row to row, making contact without challenge. This was a room full of people who had learned to read danger at a glance. He wanted them to read something else now. He wanted them to read intent. "I came early," he said, "and I came in plain clothes. Not to play a trick. Not to catch anyone in a trap. I came to see who we are when we think no one important is watching." He paused and let the sentence breathe. No one shifted. "This morning I saw small things that tell big truths. A citizen at a window who needed help and got a shoulder instead of an answer. A teenager led through a door by 2 officers. One loud for the room, one quiet for the boy. A complaint box with dust in the slot. He did not raise his voice. He did not point. He did not hurry past any of it. And I saw something else. I saw disrespect used like a tool. Not by everyone. Not even by most. But by enough to stain the badge the rest of you wear with pride." A murmur started and died in one breath. The captain watched the room with his jaw set. He did not look at Daniels, which told the room more than a stare would have. The chief rested a hand on the folder. "I have worn this badge for a long time. I have worn it in neighborhoods that did not trust it. I have worn it among officers who forgot what it stood for. Respect is not a polite word we post on a wall. It is the floor we stand on. Without it, nothing we build will hold." He shifted his stance and the wood of the lectern creaked. "Every person who walks through our doors deserves dignity. I do not care if they walked in with a uniform, a work apron, a backpack, or empty hands. Dignity first. It is not optional. It is the job." The room took that in. Some faces softened as if they had been waiting to hear it said out loud by someone who would back it up. Others stayed stiff, doing math they did not like. He opened the folder and glanced at a short set of notes. He did not need them, but he wanted the room to see he had a plan. "In the next 30 days, we will make changes you can feel, not just hear. The complaint box will be checked every week and logged. Training on de-escalation and bias will not be a poster on the wall. It will be in this room with your names on the roster and with scenarios from our own streets. Supervisors will ride with every shift. I will be out there too. Not for a photo, for the work." He looked up again. "We will host 2 community nights this month. Not town hall theater, real talk. We will listen more than we speak. We will bring outcomes back here and turn them into policy. If you are worried this means we will be soft, hear me now. We will be firm. We will be fair. We will be accountable. That is strength." He let that land and then turned his head toward the side wall where Daniel stood. He did not call a name. He did not point a finger. "Some behavior I observed this morning crossed a line," he said. "Those matters will be handled directly with records reviewed and actions taken. If you think I am talking about you, stay after this briefing." A rustle moved through the room like a low wind. Daniel's jaw twitched. He tried to look bored and looked cornered instead. The chief brought his gaze back to the rows. "I am not here to humiliate anyone. I am here to fix a house that belongs to a city, not to any one of us. If you are ready to do the job the right way, I will stand with you, train with you, and fight for you. If you are not, I will not carry you. No one will." He closed the folder. The soft thud sounded final. "This is the first 5 minutes of a new chapter. We will write it together line by line, choice by choice. It starts now," he nodded to the captain. The captain cleared his throat and read the day's assignments with a voice that had found new steel. Officers took out pens. Pages turned. Radios clicked. The room's energy shifted from spectacle to work. As the briefing broke, chairs scraped again, but no one rushed for the door. Many stole a look at the chief as they stood. Some looked ashamed. Some looked relieved. A few looked angry, though they kept it behind their teeth. The chief stepped away from the lectern and stood near the front row, speaking quietly with the young officer who had kept her distance from the jokes. She listened, shoulders loosening as he talked. 2 sergeants approached and asked for direction. He gave clear, simple tasks and thanked them by name. At the side wall, Daniels had not moved. His arms were still crossed, but the pose no longer read as strong. It read as stuck. He met the chief's eyes for the first time and looked away almost at once. "Officer," the chief said, calm and even. "Stay a moment." The room emptied by degrees until only a handful remained. The captain closed the door. The map of the city watched from the wall, pins and string crossing neighborhoods where people would feel the ripple of whatever happened in this room. The chief did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The reveal was complete. The masks were off. The work would begin in the next breath. The door closed softly behind the last of the officers, leaving only a few inside the briefing room. The hum of the old fluorescent light filled the silence, steady and low, like a clock ticking down to a verdict. The chief remained at the front, calm, posture straight, his hands folded loosely on the lectern. Across the room, Officer Daniels stood stiff against the wall, his face red, his smirk long gone. The captain cleared his throat, but the chief lifted one hand gently, stopping him. This wasn't the captain's burden. This was his. He stepped away from the lectern and crossed the space slowly, each step deliberate. His presence filled the room more than raised voices ever could. When he stopped a few feet from Daniels, the air seemed heavier. The officer shifted his weight, but the wall at his back offered no escape. "You spat on me," the chief said, his tone steady, not sharp. "You thought I was just another man you could humiliate." His eyes didn't waver. "But in truth, you spat on the badge itself. You spat on the oath we all swore, and you spat on the trust this community already struggles to give us." Daniels tried to speak. His voice cracked. "Chief, I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," the chief cut in, his words firm but not loud. "You didn't care to know. You didn't look past the shirt, the shoes, the skin. You made a judgment and you acted on it. Not just a bad choice. A dangerous one." The captain stood quietly nearby, his arms folded, his face grim. Two sergeants lingered near the door, silent witnesses to the moment. The chief turned slightly, raising his voice just enough for them too. "This department has allowed arrogance to grow like rot in the beams of a house. Laughter at cruelty, silence at misconduct. That ends today." He turned back to Daniels. "Effective immediately, you are suspended. There will be a full review of your record, and every complaint, every report will be opened again. If you think this is just a slap on the wrist, think again." The words landed like stones. Daniels's face burned. He dropped his gaze, jaw tight, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. For the first time that morning, he looked small, cornered by the weight of his own choices. The chief didn't let the silence soften. He stepped closer, voice quieter now, almost personal. "When you disrespected me, you disrespected every good officer who wears this badge with pride. You made their job harder, you made their oath cheaper, and you confirmed every fear our community already carries about us." The sergeants glanced at one another, the weight of the words heavy on them too. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. The chief finally stepped back. He didn't need to say more. His eyes lingered on Daniels one last time before sweeping across the few who remained. Accountability is not optional. It begins today. If you think you can't rise to it, then this is not your place. But if you stay, understand this: every choice, every word, every action will count. For better or worse. He turned and walked back to the lectern, gathering his folder with slow precision. Then he nodded to the captain, signaling the end. As Daniels was led out, the sergeants on either side of him, the young officer from earlier, peeked in from the hall. She caught sight of the chief's face, steady and composed, and something shifted in her eyes. Relief, maybe even hope. The reckoning had begun. The house of arrogance had been cracked open. What came next would not be easy, but for the first time in years, the precinct was no longer laughing. The precinct felt different the very next day. Not better yet, just different. Laughter was quieter. People watched their own words. The chief walked the halls at sunrise with a cup of black coffee and a small notebook he rarely opened. He learned names. He asked about families. He thanked the night shift for the calls they had cleared. He held eye contact just long enough to make it clear that he saw people, not just uniforms. Small things changed first. The complaint box moved from a dusty corner to the front desk right under a camera. A sign above it said "Dignity First." The clerk at records was asked to stand up when a citizen came to the window. The front desk sergeant had to greet each visitor within 30 seconds. These were not big policies on paper. They were small rules about respect. They were enforced. The chief rode with patrol on different shifts. He sat in the passenger seat, hands folded, radio on his shoulder. He did not grab the mic unless asked. He let officers lead. On one call, a neighbor dispute, an angry man met them in a driveway, chest high, words hot. The chief said nothing at first. The officer spoke fast and firm. The man's voice got louder. The chief leaned forward and asked one question in a calm tone. What happened first? The man blinked, surprised to be asked. His shoulders fell a little. The argument cooled. They worked out a simple plan and no one left in handcuffs. Back in the car, the officer stared through the windshield. I've been saying the last thing first, he said. Today I tried the first thing. The chief nodded. Start there. You will hear different answers. Training began the next week. Chairs filled the briefing room in rows. No slides, no long speeches, scenarios instead. 2 officers played out a traffic stop with a nervous driver. Then they paused the scene and tried it again with different words. The captain kept time. The chief walked between rows listening. Some officers rolled their eyes at first. By the 3rd scenario, most were leaning forward, notebooks open, writing down lines that worked under pressure. The rule was simple. Don't perform, practice. Not everyone welcomed the change. A flyer appeared on a locker that said, "Watch what you say." It wasn't advice. It was a threat. The chief took it down himself and called a meeting for supervisors only. He spoke in a quiet voice, each word clear. You will not let fear run this house. If you see bullying, you stop it. If you hear it, you name it. If you ignore it, it becomes yours. 2 supervisors were counseled the same day. One was moved from the schedule for a week and told to shadow community affairs. Word spread. The flyers stopped. Daniels filed his appeal. The hearing room was small and bright. The chief did not dramatize what happened. He did not add a single adjective. He gave facts. Reports and past complaints were read aloud by internal affairs. A pattern emerged the way patterns always do. Quiet at first, then loud. The appeal was denied. The suspension held. The locker was emptied. A badge number that once controlled a hallway now sat in a file. The message reached every corner of the building without a single raised voice. The young officer who had watched the incident from the doorway asked for time on the chief's calendar. When she sat down in his office, she spoke with both hands clenched. I didn't say anything that day, she said. I was afraid to be next. The chief nodded. Fear grows in rooms that reward silence. We are changing the room. He gave her a simple assignment. Bring me 3 examples this week of something you want to keep in this place and 1 thing you want to end. She returned with a list. The keep list was long. Teamwork on a hard call, a sergeant who checked on a sick rookie, a civilian volunteer who stayed late to help a family. The end list had 1 word: cruelty. Community nights began in the high school gym. Folding chairs, a cheap microphone, no podium. The chief sat with the captain and 3 officers on a low riser. People came angry and left cautious. Some asked why complaints had gone unanswered. The chief did not defend the past. He owned it. We miss things, he said. We are changing how we listen. A mother described a stop that left her son afraid to bike to the store. The chief wrote down the exact street and time and promised a call back with details. 2 days later, she got it. She cried on the phone, not because the answer was perfect, but because someone answered. The chief created a small review group that met weekly at 7 a.m. 2 patrol officers, a detective, a supervisor, a dispatcher, and 1 civilian staff member. They looked at 3 things only: use of force, complaints, and commendations. They watched body cam clips and wrote 1 sentence for each case. What we did right, what we will do better next time. The sentences went on a board in the break room. No names, only lessons. Officers started reading the board between calls. The sentences got better. Data shifted in quiet ways. Response times dropped by a small slice. Complaints were acknowledged within 48 hours. Commanders made ride-alongs part of their week, not their month. A sergeant started bringing a small box of bottled water to calls in July and kept it in the trunk. Another officer bought 2 new car seats for a family after a crash and installed them himself in the parking lot. None of this made the news. The city still had hard days, but the temperature at the edges of every call was a little lower. Inside the walls, the tone changed too. The language people used about the public softened. Not weak, just human. The chief banned a few phrases. He did not send a memo. He said the words out loud. We will not call people by their problems. That meant no nicknames based on addiction, poverty, or the worst thing someone had done on their worst day. It took a month for that habit to die. It did. Some pushback came from strange places. A veteran said, "We can't be social workers." The chief agreed. You are not. But you can be decent. You can be clear. You can be firm without being cruel, and when a social worker is the right answer, call one sooner. The veteran stared at the floor. Fair enough, he said. The captain changed too. He had carried years of tired battles. Now he moved with new purpose. He visited the records window twice a day to check the line and thank the clerk. He sat in the review group once a week, even when it wasn't his turn. He started a short ritual at the end of each shift. 1 minute only. One story from the day worth repeating. The stories spread and the right habits with them. On patrol, the young officer who had kept quiet began to find her voice. She corrected a partner's tone on a stop with a gentle nudge. She asked a man sleeping under an awning if he needed a ride to the shelter, instead of telling him to move along. When a teen raised his voice in a park, she lowered hers. The teen lowered his next. She wrote her own one-sentence lesson on the break room board. The person yelling is not always the threat. Sometimes it is fear with a voice. A rumor popped up that the chief wanted cameras everywhere to catch people doing wrong. He answered it in a hallway conversation, not a memo. Cameras protect the truth, he said. They will show your good work most days, and on the hard days they will teach us what to fix. The rumor lost its heat by Friday. The city noticed small shifts. A shopkeeper told an officer, "You look me in the eye now." A pastor dropped off a list of teens who wanted to ride along for an hour. A teacher asked for a safety talk at the school that did not sound like fear, but sounded like care. The chief sent officers who knew how to speak to kids without scaring them. The talk ended with students trying the radio, saying 10-4, and laughing for the right reason. Not every week brought progress. A tense arrest drew loud criticism online. The review group watched the footage, wrote 2 sentences, and made a change to tactics. The chief recorded a short video message with the captain, explaining the change in plain language and posting it on the precinct page. Comments were mixed, but the message was clear. We saw it, we learned from it. We adjusted. The chief kept a stack of handwritten thank you cards in his bottom drawer. He wrote 3 each week. 1 to an officer, 1 to a civilian staff member, 1 to someone in the community who had helped. He wrote them on the same plain cards, signed them with the same blue pen, and walked them to the mail slot himself. Quiet rewards can carry more weight than loud punishments. The building began to feel that. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, a thin envelope arrived from the city office. It held the final word on the appeal and the results of a broader review that had opened doors the precinct had kept shut for too long. The chief read it once, then once more. He set it down, breathed out, and looked at the map of the city on his wall. Pins crossed neighborhoods like threads. He traced one with his eyes, from the gym where the community nights were held to the block where the first complaint had been answered on time. He stood, straightened his jacket, and stepped into the hallway. Officers moved past with purpose but without rush. The young officer nodded as she passed, a quiet confidence in her eyes. The captain met him halfway, a question ready. The chief gave a single, steady nod. The struggle had not ended. It had become the work, and the work was finally moving the house. The next part would ask even more of everyone, on the street, at the desk, in the rooms where hard choices are made. But for the first time, the building felt like it could carry the weight. They were ready to try. The letter from the city sat on the edge of the chief's desk, thin and final. He read it once, then slid it into a folder marked with today's date. The appeal was closed. The review was complete. Actions were set. He stood, looked out the window at the morning light over Blue Ridge, and felt the steady weight of the work ahead. Not a burden, a duty. Inside the precinct, small things added up. The complaint box was checked every Friday at noon, and the log was posted on the wall. Supervisors started walking the lobby twice a day, greeting people by name. The records clerk now stood when a citizen stepped to the glass. She added a small bowl of pens with a handwritten note that said, "Take 1." The front desk sergeant had a timer on his phone to keep the 30-second rule. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. Patrol shifts changed their rhythm. Each team began 1 call a day on foot, even if the car could take them closer. Walking slowed tempers and opened eyes. The chief rode along at odd hours so no one could plan the shift around him. He asked the same first question on every scene. What happened first? Officers started saying it too. The tone of calls bent a little because the first words were different. Training moved from the projector to the floor. Officers practiced voice control by reading real radio traffic out loud at half speed. They ran scenarios twice, the second time with a different opener and a softer stance. They watched body cam clips together and wrote one sentence about the lesson. The board in the break room grew full. People began to point at it between calls. They argued a bit, then fixed tactics a bit. The room felt less defensive and more curious. Some days hit hard. A tense arrest drew angry posts online. The review group met early, watched the footage frame by frame, and changed their approach for that type of stop. The captain filmed a short explanation with the chief, plain words and no spin. The video did not make everyone happy, but it told the truth and showed the fix. That became the rule. Say what happened, show what changes, do it quickly. The young officer who had stood silent in the doorway found her voice. On one shift, she stepped between a loud partner and a scared teenager and used calm questions until the boy's hands stopped shaking. Later, she wrote on the board, "Ask simple things first." She mentored 2 new recruits and brought them to community night in the school gym. They sat in the front row and listened to a mother talk about her son's fear. After the meeting, they carried folding chairs back to the storage room without being asked. It looked small. It felt large. The chief kept his promises. He called people back when he said he would. He showed up at the park cleanups on Saturdays, work gloves in his pocket. He stopped by a barber shop one afternoon and stayed for a full hour just listening. A man in the corner chair said he had not seen a chief sit in that room in 15 years. The chief said, "Then we should not wait another 15. Numbers moved slowly but in the right direction. Fewer force reports, quicker callbacks, more notes of thanks in the mail slot. A pastor wrote that 2 officers had stayed after a tough call to play basketball with kids on the court. A shopkeeper wrote that an officer had returned to check on a broken lock the next day. The notes were short. They were proof. When the first year closed, the precinct marked the day in a quiet way. No banner, no speeches. The captain set a coffee urn on a table in the briefing room and put out a plate of store cookies. People came in, took a cup, and talked about regular things. The chief stood near the map of the city and watched the small groups form and shift. Laughter rose and fell easy and clean. It did not hook onto anyone. He breathed in that sound like a man who had been waiting for rain. Late that afternoon, he walked the hallway alone. The photos in the display case caught the light. He stopped at a black and white from decades ago, a parade down the main street, hats in the air. Pride looked different then, but the core was the same. Pride should not come from power. It should come from service done well. A voice came from behind him. It was the young officer. She said there was a kid in the lobby who wanted to say hello. The chief went out and found the boy from the community event standing on his toes to see over the counter. The boy smiled shyly and held out a drawing of a police car with a heart on the door. The chief knelt to take it and thanked him like it was a medal. The boy's father stood back by the door, arms crossed, eyes careful but soft. Trust does not arrive all at once. It walks. As evening came, the chief returned to his office and wrote 3 cards by hand, one to the records clerk for the pens and the note, one to a patrol officer who had bought 2 car seats after a crash, one to the teacher who asked for a safety talk that showed care, not fear. He sealed the envelopes and walked them to the mail slot himself. Before he left, he stood at the doorway and looked at the empty chairs, the neat stacks of forms, the clock on the wall. He thought of the morning that started it all. The spit, the laughter, the silence that followed when the truth entered the room. He did not replay it with anger. He held it the way you hold a story that taught you something you should not forget. He turned off the light and stepped into the hall. The building sounded different now. Radios murmured. Boots moved with purpose but without rush. Someone laughed near the break room and it sounded kind. Outside, the air was cooler than it had been that first day. The hills were dark against a pale sky. He felt the badge at his chest, the weight steady and right. Change is not a moment. It is a practice. It was now the practice of this house. He locked the door behind him and walked to his car. The work would start again tomorrow. That was the promise he had made. And this time the whole house was learning how to keep it.